I never thought a simple walk along the edge of my property would turn into a full-blown battle of ignorance versus law, but that morning, as I stepped out with my coffee and the faint smell of dew on the grass, I noticed the most outrageous thing: a heap of trash, bags ripped open, cardboard boxes, broken furniture, dumped right on what I knew was my land. At first, I thought maybe some careless neighbors had left it there, but the bright, familiar voice of Karen from the HOA carried across the distance, arguing loudly with herself about who owned this patch of dirt. It wasn't even an argument directed at me, not yet. It was the kind of dramatic, self-important monologue only a Karen could pull off, gesticulating wildly as if the entire neighborhood was on some invisible jury. I watched from my porch, gripping my mug tighter, realizing that this wasn't just a minor incident of HOA overreach, it was going to spiral. The property I'd purchased years ago, the one I'd meticulously cleared and cultivated, had recently been designated as part of a small but significant wildlife preserve. A move I'd been secretly proud of, quietly championing the return of native species, replanting wildflowers, and leaving safe zones for local fauna. The irony was delicious in a way I couldn't yet articulate. Karen, armed with her clipboard and imaginary authority, had literally desecrated a protected wildlife area. Birds squawked from nearby trees, scattering as the trash hit the soil, and I could see the tiny tracks of raccoons and foxes in the dirt around her pile, already disrupted by the intrusion. I could feel my pulse quicken not just with irritation but with a curious sense of satisfaction. I knew the law was squarely on my side, though Karen, in her delusional sense of entitlement, had no idea. My mind raced through every scenario: confront her politely, call the HOA, document the violation, or perhaps take the moral high ground and simply wait for the natural consequences of dumping trash in a wildlife preserve. But deep down, I knew waiting wasn't my style. I had invested too much sweat, time, and heart into this land to let a self-important busybody sully it with her ignorance. As I strode toward the mess, the morning sun catching the dust in golden shafts, I felt the strange mix of anger and amusement that comes with watching someone crash headfirst into reality, utterly unprepared for the consequences of their actions. Little did Karen know, this wasn't just land anymore, it was a living ecosystem, and her careless intervention would soon trigger a chain of events that neither she nor the HOA could ever imagine. I marched up to the heap of garbage, my boots crunching over the gravel and fallen leaves, trying to keep my temper in check, though every instinct in me wanted to yell. Karen, of course, was completely oblivious to my approach, muttering about community standards and unsanctioned property use as she shoved a torn bag of trash against a makeshift pile. I stopped a few feet away, letting her see me, the morning light glinting off the rim of my coffee mug, because there was something delicious about letting her squirm before I spoke. "Karen," I said evenly, though my voice carried authority, "do you have any idea what you just did?" She jumped, spinning around as if I'd materialized out of thin air, her face a mixture of shock and indignation. I'm just enforcing the rules," she stammered, pointing at the trash like it had a mind of its own. I couldn't help but chuckle, the absurdity of the situation settling over me like a warm fog. "The rules? You dumped trash on a protected wildlife preserve, Karen. Those rules don't apply here. This land is under federal and county protection now, and every bag you tossed is a violation." Her eyes widened, and for a brief second, I thought she might actually comprehend the gravity of the situation, but only for a heartbeat. Of course, that second passed, and she resumed her defensive stance, arms flailing, as though sheer volume could rewrite reality. Around us, the animals that had taken up residence on my land were either hiding or cautiously peeking from the underbrush, their tiny eyes reflecting the chaos humans bring into their world. A fox darted behind a cluster of shrubs, a family of squirrels chattered nervously in the trees, and birds scattered in short, panicked bursts. My patience, as vast as it had grown over the years of dealing with neighborhood nonsense, was thinning. I could feel the energy in the air shift, not just mine, but the land's, the animals, the very soil reacting to the intrusion. I made a mental note to photograph every piece of evidence, not out of spite, but because I knew that one phone call to the county's wildlife enforcement would make Karen's world crumble faster than any HOA warning ever could. And in that moment, standing on my land, facing someone who thought they wielded authority while utterly ignorant of reality, I realized just how satisfying it was to watch ignorance collide with law and nature, and to know I had front row seats to the aftermath. Karen's protestations grew louder, a desperate volley of words thrown like plastic bags into the wind, but I tuned most of it out, focusing instead on cataloging the chaos she had created. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began taking pictures, zooming in on shredded garbage, scattered papers, and broken furniture, all mixed with mud and paw prints of animals that had once called this land home. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had been so consumed by her imagined authority that she completely ignored the signs posted by the county, the small plaques marking endangered plants and nesting sites, and the pamphlets the Wildlife Commission had sent to every resident in the area. I could almost hear the faint scolding from every bird, squirrel, and fox as they fled from her intrusion. "You don't understand," she shouted, waving her arms like she was conducting an invisible orchestra, "this is private property. You can't just," I cut her off, my tone calm but unwavering. "It's no longer private property in the traditional sense, Karen. This is a designated wildlife preserve, and your actions are a direct violation of both federal and local environmental regulations. You just dumped trash where birds nest, where foxes hunt, and where native plants grow. That's not enforcing rules, that's destruction." She blinked rapidly, trying to find some foothold in my words, but there wasn't one. I could see the gears turning in her head, frantic and futile, a mind trained to see every dispute as a battle she could win, yet completely unprepared for consequences beyond HOA letters. As I continued documenting the scene, I noticed that the fox family, initially scared, began circling back cautiously, and a pair of bluebirds landed on a nearby branch, watching the chaos unfold with wary curiosity. My anger began to shift into a cold satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing the law and nature itself were aligned with me. Karen's ignorance had created the perfect storm, proof of her recklessness, visible damage to the preserve, and a teachable moment that she would never fully understand until county officials arrived. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs, and I decided it was time to escalate. A single phone call to the Wildlife Commission would be enough to bring this farce to a halt, and Karen would finally see that her little kingdom of HOA authority didn't extend into real law, or the domain of nature. Watching her flail, a mixture of panic and indignation on her face, I felt a quiet thrill, knowing that the balance of power had shifted, if only temporarily, from human arrogance to natural justice. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the disturbed soil, and the smell of damp earth mingled with the faint stench of rotting trash. I could see Karen pacing in small circles, muttering under her breath, as if repeating her mantra of authority would somehow rewrite reality. I stepped closer, careful not to spook the wildlife that was slowly beginning to peek out again, and addressed her once more. "Karen, you need to understand something very important," I said firmly. "This land isn't just a patch of grass or some HOA-managed lot. It's a living ecosystem. Those trees, those shrubs, those birds and foxes, they're all protected. What you've done is more than careless. It's illegal." Her face twisted in indignation, but I could see the first flickers of comprehension, or maybe it was fear, cross her features. I gestured to the littered scene, a sofa cushion ripped in half, plastic bottles smeared with mud, papers fluttering in the breeze. "All of this mess, belongs to the county now, and it's under strict preservation laws. One call, one report, and this entire situation escalates beyond HOA fines." I could practically hear her mental cogs grinding, desperately searching for a loophole that didn't exist. Around us, nature seemed to exhale, small creatures cautiously returning to their routines, sensing that the disturbance had an authority greater than hers, mine, perhaps, or the county's, or simply the undeniable order of the preserve itself. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of investment and care for this land pressing behind my chest. I had nurtured it, cultivated it, and fought battles to protect it from ignorance like hers, and now, standing here, I realized the full extent of the irony. Karen thought she was policing me, but in reality, she had exposed herself as the reckless invader. Finally, I dialed the county wildlife office, the sound of my finger pressing the buttons deliberate and unhurried, each tone echoing in the quiet morning air. Karen's eyes widened as the call connected, her hands flailing in sudden panic. "You can't do that," she exclaimed, but I simply smiled, watching her unravel. I explained the situation, detailing the location, the debris, and the wildlife disrupted by her actions, careful to remain calm and precise, every word reinforcing the undeniable fact that she had crossed a line she couldn't recover from. As I hung up, the sense of inevitability settled over us both. The preserve would be protected, Karen would face consequences, and the balance she had tried to disrupt was slowly restoring itself. I stepped back, letting her absorb the reality, feeling a quiet satisfaction that justice, nature, and reason had aligned in my favor. By late morning, county officials arrived, trucks rumbling up the dirt path, uniforms crisp, and their presence commanding immediate attention. Karen froze mid-sentence, her hands hovering helplessly over the heap of trash, realizing that no amount of yelling or HOA-issued threats could undo what had been done. I stayed back, arms crossed, watching with a mixture of triumph and relief as they assessed the scene, photographing the mess, taking notes, and quietly explaining to Karen the severity of dumping waste on a protected wildlife preserve. I could see the color drain from her face as reality sank in. This wasn't a polite suggestion or a neighborhood squabble anymore. "You need to remove all this immediately," one officer said firmly, "and you will be responsible for any fines or legal action resulting from this violation." Karen stammered, trying to assert control, but it was futile. Meanwhile, I walked through the edges of the property, checking on the wildlife, noting that the foxes had cautiously returned to their dens, birds flitted between branches, and the air, once heavy with tension, felt alive again. The preserve, resilient as it always had been, seemed to breathe a little easier, as if acknowledging that human recklessness would not dominate it. I stepped forward, offering calm explanations to the officers about the property's history, my efforts to nurture native plants, and the careful balance of life that Karen had disrupted in a moment of arrogance. It was vindication, pure and simple. My investment, patience, and dedication had not only saved the preserve but exposed the limits of HOA authority when confronted with true law and natural protection. Karen, humbled and red-faced, was left with nothing but paperwork, reprimands, and the slow realization that entitlement had consequences. I watched her retreat, shoulders slumped, muttering under her breath, while the trucks carried the trash away and order began to restore itself. Standing there, feeling the sun on my face and hearing the soft rustle of leaves and distant bird calls, I realized something profound. Protecting something meaningful requires more than just ownership. It requires vigilance, patience, and respect for forces larger than ourselves. Karen had learned her lesson in the harshest way possible, but the preserve had endured, stronger and more vibrant than ever, a living testament to the fact that nature, law, and dedication would always triumph over ignorance and arrogance. And as I walked back to my house, the morning sun reflecting off the clean, untouched patches of grass and wildflowers, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the land I loved had won this battle, and that I had been right there to witness every moment of poetic justice unfold.